Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good day everyone. Today I will be reporting about learning centered methods in language teaching. Basically, this topic focuses on how learners actually acquire language naturally, meaning you are not forcing learning to happen. It happens automatically through experience or exposure rather than just studying strict grammar rules. But before we dive in with our discussion, allow me to share the expected learning outcome of this lesson. So we will be guided as we go along with our discussion. So at the end of this presentation, you are expected to explain the concept of learning centered methods in language teaching, describe the key features of the natural approach, and the communicational teaching project. You would be able to discuss the theoretical principles of learning centered pedagogy, analyze the roles of teachers, learners, and tasks in learning centered classrooms, and you would be able to evaluate the advantages and limitations of learning centered methods in English language teaching. So let's proceed. As you can see in the screen, before learning centered methods, we had these two main approaches, or we are familiar with this two approaches, the language centered methods and this one, the learner centered methods. So language centered methods focuses on grammar and structure, while learner centered methods focuses on how learners use language. So both of these methods use the PPP. Before I continue, let me briefly explain what PPP is, since it is mentioned here. So PPP stands for presentation, practice, and production. So this is a traditional teaching procedure um, that I usually follow. First is the presentation. So this is the part where you would introduce a new topic, or if you have a topic, you would the first thing you would do is explain the concept or the content of that certain topic. For instance, you have a topic about past tense. So what are you going to do in the presentation part? Of course, you would explain what is past tense, like what are the rules that they need to consider in transforming the past tense of a verb. So those are the things that you would consider in the presentation part. Now, here comes the next P, the practice. So this is the part where you would try to control or check the learning of your learners by giving assessments. So like uh test type, fill in the blanks. For instance, you have the sentence, I blank go or went to school yesterday. So the learner would choose what is the correct form of verb that the sentence needs. So uh, that this is where practice came in. Next is the last P, which is the production. So this is where you would let your learners use the language freely. So you can do this by asking questions, allowing your learners to share their experiences using the language. So they will feel free to express themselves through answering your questions. However, although these two approaches may be different, but their focus is more about like language forms and not really on how learning happens. And this is why learning centered methods came in. So this uh, so let's proceed to the next slide. So now let's move on to the emergence of learning centered methods. So during the 1980s, there was an important shift in language teaching. So before this period or before the 1980s, teaching mainly focused on like grammar rules, language structure, correct forms, but scholars started wondering and started to ask, how do learners actually learn a language? So they shifted their focus from teaching to learning process. So instead of asking themselves, what should we teach? They began asking, how do students learn best? And this led to the development of process-oriented approaches. And this include the following as you can see in the screen. So we have the comprehension approach by Winich, 1981, the natural approach by Krashen and Trara, 1983, the proficiency-oriented approach by Umagyo, 1986, the communicational approach by Prabhu, 1987, the lexical approach by Lewis in 1993 and Willis, 1990, the process approach by Legutke and Thomas, 1991. So these scholars emphasize meaning, comprehension, communication, and natural language learnings rather than memorization of grammar rules. And as you can see in the screen, I have bolded two approaches, which are the natural approach by Krashen and Terrell, 1983, and the communicational approach by Prabhu, 1987. So in this lesson, we would focus on these two approaches. So now let's talk about one of the most important learning centered methods, which is the natural approach. So the natural approach was uh, basically developed by Stephen Krashen, so which is a well-known linguist who studied how people acquire language. So this Stephen Krashen, as if you still remember, he is known for his theory of second language acquisition. And another proponent of this natural approach is Tracy Terrell, which is a language teacher who actually applied these ideas in her actual classrooms. So their goal in the natural approach was to make language learning more natural and realistic. So this approach is, like I mentioned earlier, is based on Krashen's monetary model of second language acquisition. So if you still remember, we encountered this approach in our first semester. So this model basically explain how people naturally acquire a second language. So it suggests that language is acquired, not just learned. And acquisition happens when learners understand messages. So the main idea of this natural approach is that we learn language the same way we learned our first language, We learn it naturally. So this means we should not pressure our student to speak immediately, and we should not focus on grammar rules. Just like how you learn your first language, our our parents didn't pressure us to speak immediately, right? We learn our first language because we always heard it to the people around us. It could be our parents, or even our or the environment we are in, and we acquire that language because we are exposed to it, not because we intend to learn it. So one of the most important concept here is the comprehensible input, where it is often explained as I plus one. So this stands for the child's I stands for the child's current level, while the plus one stands for the a little bit more than the child knows. So it should be uh, that input should be slightly above this the learner's current level. So let me give you an example. So imagine that the students already understand basic English sentences. Then the teacher says, "Yesterday I went to the market and bought fruits." Now, maybe the students don't know the word bought, but but they can still understand the sentence because they know the word yesterday. They understand went to the market, and they can guess that bought is something related to getting or buying food. So even if there is a new word, they they can understand the meaning through context. So that's what we call I plus one. So the sentence is just slightly above their level, but still understandable. So in other words, this comprehensible input shows that learning happens while learners are understanding the message, not memorizing the vocabulary. So what about grammar in natural approach? Grammar in natural approach is not directly taught. Instead, learners acquire grammar subconsciously. So this means they learn grammar without realizing it. And learners learn grammar just by hearing and using the language. For instance, if a child always hear his or her teacher says he is eating, they're playing, the child would try to recognize that the pattern behind those sentences, that using ing form, if you are stating action that is ongoing, and he or she would say I am eating, I am writing, if if he does something um at the moment. In short, this natural approach believes that language is best learned not by memorizing rules, but by understanding and using it in meaningful situations. And now let's move on to communicational teaching project. So this approach was developed by Narasimhan Srinivasa Prabhu, or NS Prabhu, which is an Indian educator. So this communicational teaching project is also known as the Bangalore project because it was conducted in Bangalore, South India from 1974 to 1984. So the main idea of this approach is very simple. This approach believes that students learn language by doing tasks, not by studying grammar. So instead of memorizing rules or answering grammar exercises, students use the language to complete meaningful task. That task could be any activity where students use the language. For instance, um, tasks like solving a problem, sharing information, or or a complete goal. So, for instance, you want your learners to use the English language and giving directions. So you would show. So what you need to do is you could show a map and then ask them questions like, how can I go from the school to the market? The students may respond or may answer, go straight near the store, or turn left, turn right, like that. So even if their grammar is not perfect, they are they are communicating using real life language, which is the focus of this approach. So let's differentiate natural versus communicational teaching approach. So both approaches believe that grammar is learned naturally, not through direct teaching. But this natural approach still touch grammar through understanding the message, while this communicational teaching projects will just let the learners speak with their guidance. So when it comes to their differences, natural approach focuses on understanding input, while communicational approach focuses on task-based learning. So basically, natural approach is learning by understanding the message, and communicational learning is learning by doing meaningful tasks. So it's actually connected by John Dewey's idea, learning by doing. So let's proceed to the theoretical foundations of learning centered methods. So learning centered methods are based on four theories. What are those theories? We have the theory of language learning, theory of language teaching, and content specifications or syllabus design. Now let's move on to the theory of language in learning centered pedagogy. So, learning centered pedagogy is based on two major perspectives about language. So, these are the Chomskyan cognitive perspective and the Hallidayan functional perspective. So, first we have the Chomskyan cognitive perspective. So, basically, this is developed by Noam Chomsky. So, this perspective says that language learning involves mental processes inside the brain. So this means learners are not just copying language, they are thinking, they are processing and organizing what they learn. So when you say language learning, it is a mental activity. So for instance, a student hears she is playing even without being taught the rule. The students begin to recognize the patterns and understand sentence structure. So this shows that the brain is actively processing the language. So this Chomskyan cognitive perspective actually aligned with this natural approach. While Hallidayan functional perspective, which is developed by Mac Halliday, so this perspective says language is learned through meaningful use in communication. So learners use language to communicate in a real situation. So for instance, a student a student says, "I want water." So even if Even if the grammar is not perfect, the message is clear that the child wants to drink water. So the focus of Holidayan perspective is more on a meaning and a communication. So to make it a simple, Chomskyan's view believe that to make it simple, Chomskyan's view believe that language is a mental process, while Halidayan's view that language is used for communication. So now let's proceed to another theoretical foundations of learning-centered methods, the theory of language learning. So there are four important principles in language learning. First is the incidental learning, the meaning focused learning, the comprehension based learning, and the cyclical and parallel learning. For the first principle, which is the incidental learning, so it simply means language is learned naturally, not intentionally. So this supports the idea of Krashen's, like what I discussed earlier about the natural approach. And then second principle, the meaning focused learning. So it focuses on understanding and expressing ideas, not grammar drills. Next principle is the comprehension based language development. So here, the focus of this principle is understanding the language comes first before producing it. So, for instance, uh, you have you have a story to share with your learners, and then what you will do is you will first read the story and then let them listen to you. So you would not uh, pressure them by giving questions right away, by checking if they are listening. Your focus is for them to process what is the story all about. Next is the advantages of comprehension first. First advantage is the cognitive advantage. So this concerned with the learner's focus on one skill at a time while making learning easier. So like I mentioned earlier, for instance, if you have a story to share, you will just first read the story, let the learner listen and internalize or understand the flow of the story. Next advantage is affective advantage. Learners feel less fear and embarrassment when not forced to speak immediately. So, if you have given enough time for the students to think, to internalize, to understand that certain topic, then they will they will not be, they are not they will not feel pressure in in giving the correct answers or in speaking. So you need to consider if if your learner is ready to speak. So you do not force a learner to speak, especially when they are not prepared. Next is communicative advantage. So listening helps learners interpret meaning from uh, context. So since you have given enough time for your students to understand the lesson, or to, like I mentioned earlier, to understand the story, and then you will make them feel like they are they are free to they are free to express themselves if they want, but if they don't, you won't force them. And then that's how communication came they are uh, they are if they feel like they feel motivated because they believe na they understood the story, so they are more likely would participate on their own. Like, you don't need to like call their names. They will recite because they want to, because they understand your lesson. Next, the gradual development of language production. So we have here stages of gradual development of language. So language is not learned all at once. So students move through stages. So starting from simple responses and gradually producing more complex language. So as like comparing it to a newborn, diba? If the moment we are born with this in this world, we do not know anything, right? So we 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 develop gradually. So as here in the gradual development of language production, we have here the first stage, the nonverbal responses. So this is where you know that you can, if you could see a child, if if he or she wants something, he would just use hand gestures or actions to state what he or she wants. Next stage is single word responses. Like, um, if you're asking a child, do you want do you want food? Because he or she could only answer yes or no, like that. Single word, or say the word eat, run, like that. So they can only produce single word responses. Next is the two or three word combinations. Like, this is where um uh, a child or a learner can combine three or word three two to three word combinations, like a paper and table, me no go, where book and don't go. And then here comes short phrases like, um I want to stay, where you going, boy running. And then here comes the complete sentences, like, I'm going to the market to buy rice. The next, complex discourse. So this is where the learner can express ideas in, like, can express in her ideas in um two to three sentences, and in explaining what he or she wants. So for instance, in this one, every morning I wake up at 6 a.m., I brush my teeth, eat breakfast, and then go to school. I like studying English because I can talk to friends. So as you observe, it's the development here comes through stages. So next principle, the cyclical cyclical language development. So as mentioned here, learning centered pedagogy believe that language learning is cyclical, not linear. So this means language learning is like a cycle, not a straight line. Learning a language doesn't happen step by step in a straight line. So instead, it is cyclical, like going in a circle and coming back to the same ideas again. But each time, uh, you understand it better. So for instance, you might learn a grammar rule today, and then tomorrow you would use it in speaking, and then after the day after you would read it in a story, and then and after reading it in a story, and you would be able to write it in a paragraph. So every time you come back to it, you get stronger and more confident. So um, making mistakes is normal. So they because they help you learn, um, not not to fail. Okay, think of it like climbing a spiral staircase. You go around the same level of the same level a few times, but each round you go higher. So learning a language is whole, not separate parts. So language is made of many skills working together, not just grammar or words. Your macro skills like listening, speaking, reading, writing, they should develop together, or they grow together. So learning one skill can help another. So reading improves vocabulary, speaking practices grammar, listening helps understanding. So your confidence and ability to communicate also grow alongside these skills. So for example, when you read a story, you also learn new words. You also practice speaking by talking about it, and maybe the next day you would be able to write a short summary of that story you have read. So what this means for teaching. So teachers should let students practice again and again in different ways. So combine skills and lessons like reading a story, talking about it, and then writing about it. So you need to adapt lessons to what learners need. So instead of following a strict order, so you need to make your learning active and meaningful, not just memorizing a rule. So because language learning is like a circle, not a straight line. You learn and use grammar, vocabulary, listening and speaking, reading and writing all together. So these features should not be separated. So you revisit ideas and skills many times, getting better each time. So mistakes are normal. So they help you learn. So in short, uh you don't just go step by step. You circle around. You practice and grow all your language skills together until you become confident and fluent. Next, we have the theory of language teaching. So, language is best learned when it is used to communicate meaningful messages, not um when grammar is explicitly taught. So, this actually proves the idea of a natural approach. So, what are the teacher's role in learning centered methods? So, we have four important roles. They follow meaning focused activities, they provide comprehensible input, they integrate language skills, they make incidental correction. So, I won't explain this further since I already discussed this one and the natural approach. But I would um, focus here on the teacher's role in learning centered methods. So here in the meaning focus uh, activities. So what are the activities that you can uh, use? So you can give activities like solving problems, or you know collaborative or peer group, or it could be a peer where your students could exchange ideas. So in the meaning focus is um, your focus is for the your focus is that your learners would be able to use the language in communication in real life situations. Here in providing comprehensible input. Here as a teacher, you need to assess the capabilities of your students so that you would be able to know when and how to help that learner grow or develop in his capabilities. I know this kind of work is quite challenging, but as a teacher, it's it's our job to to be passionate enough to help our learner improve holistically. And the integration of language skills. So we need to in teaching, you should not separate the four macro skills. So for instance, in a story, um, all of the four macro skills there actually uh, uh, are actually doing their task. So basically, if the child is improving in listening, he is also improving in reading, speaking, writing. So this is where integration of language skills came in. And next is the incidental error correction. So here in correcting the students, we should be what is this? We should be careful because sometimes correcting your students not in a good way would make them feel like would make them feel like they are not they're not good, or their self confidence would be lower. And you as a teacher, your task to have it's your task to or it is your responsibility to help this learner and help this learner realize their mistakes in a way na they will not be offended. So you do not correct right away. So you need to practice the what we call constructive criticism. So um, you should always bear in mind uh, that learning a language is not all about grammar. So uh, by teaching them how to use the language in meaningful communications is one of the best ways to make them learn a certain language. So we have here the theory, last theoretical foundations of learning centered methods, the content specifications, or the process based syllabus. So the learning centered pedagogy uses the process based syllabus. So actually, this is also connected with the natural approach. So instead of grammar topics, so this process-based syllabus focuses on like communication task, problem-solving activities, real-life situations. So you could give activities uh, like asking for directions, shopping, filling out forms, or personal information exchanges. So this will actually help your learners to face what's really happening on our world. So here are the strengths and the limitations of learning centered methods. For the strengths, it encourages meaningful communication, it reduces learner anxiety, and it reflects natural language acquisition. And for the limitations, it has a limited focus on grammar accuracy, difficult to design task appropriate for all learners. Yes, it is um, difficult, but if you would know how to use it, then it's better. It's because because now because communication is really an important role because I am also uh that before I'm also that kind of learner who is always afraid to speak because I am scared to commit mistakes, and I have this teacher who always like try to tell you are wrong. He 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 or she doesn't know how to correct properly. So for the another limitations, it requires skilled teachers to manage classroom interaction. And that could be all for this report. Thank you for listening. Nangantar din si Mamut Asar na importante din niya mo niya pagkakilagay. Ako masakinit siya kagad po. Yung siguro ako makikinig siya. Kagad nga po. Kung yung manisa.